For Earth Day, we are taking a look at one of the world's most vital resources, water. Recent data shows around 4 billion people experience severe water scarcity for at least 1 month out of the year. And here in the United States, more than 2 million Americans are living without access to running water. Access to clean water is expected to worsen in the years to come. The World Economic Forum predicts there will be a 40% gap between global water supply and demand by the end of the decade. For more, let's bring in George McGraw. George is the CEO of DigDeep, a nonprofit that works to provide water to Americans who wouldn't otherwise have access. He joins me now from Los Angeles. George, thank you for being here. Let's just ask the most basic of questions. How is it possible that over 2 million Americans don't have access to clean water?
Thanks for having me, Lana. It was really crazy that here in the richest democracy on earth, more than 2 million people struggle with this basic thing. I think, many Americans, when they imagine life without water, imagine places like sub-Saharan Africa or Southeast Asia. They don't imagine that that person might live right around the corner from them. The causes are sort of a well-known story in the U.S. We have an incredible water system that serves more than 99% of the population, but it was never built to serve everybody. Structural racism meant that these investments didn't reach mostly Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities in parts of America that still struggle today to get enough clean water every day to survive.
Again, I'm still sort of trying to understand the obstacles that people who don't have water in America are facing. Is it that they live off of the grid, or is it that there are entire communities that just don't have clean, accessible water?
Yeah, so this isn't a story of just, a couple people choosing to live off the grid. This is entire communities. Anywhere from sort of, neighborhood size to many neighborhoods fitting together. Some of them have never had water access. Some of them used to have it and have lost it as our infrastructure in the U.S. Continues to deteriorate without the investment needed to keep it running. Many of these folks live rurally in hard-to-reach places where traditional infrastructure can't be built. Some of them, however, live just blocks from existing water and sanitation lines and just have never been hooked up, either because those projects have been deemed too expensive or there hasn't been enough political will, or in many cases, these communities have just been sort of invisible to law and policymakers.
So what is your organization doing to try and help get water to these people?
Yeah, so I run a nonprofit based here in Los Angeles called digdeep.org, and we partner with these communities around the country that don't have water and sanitation access and help them get it. In many places, we build infrastructure, making investments in water lines or in sanitation systems. In some places where it's really difficult to serve populations, we might invest in a sort of decentralized system or even a community program that, say, delivers water to people's homes by trucks and fills cisterns underground. Anything we can do to get people the hot and cold running water that they deserve. But of course, to solve this problem for those 2.2 million Americans, it's going to take a lot more than just the effort of one small nonprofit. So we also partner with other organizations, government agencies, academics, and we try to educate policymakers about what laws and policies can be put in place to solve this problem long term. We do research, which is how we came up with that 2.2 million number. And we try to coordinate our efforts to really end this crisis in our lifetimes.
George, you mentioned that indigenous communities and various Indian Nation reservations are one of the areas that lack, at times, access to appropriate water. We also know that many of these same communities have been hit hard by the coronavirus pandemic. I'm wondering if you can tell us more about specific communities and how water access played a role in some of the problems that we've also seen with the pandemic.
Absolutely. I mean, we all remember that for months when we were just learning about this virus, we were being told by our public health officials there's really only 2 things you need to do. You need to wash your hands frequently and you need to stay at home. And those 2 things are simply impossible if you don't have clean, reliable running water at home. First, you can't keep yourself or your family clean. And second, you're constantly forced to break social isolation to go out and collect water, buying it from a store where, we all remember it was really difficult because of hoarding bottled water and purchase limits to get enough water to say, both drink and clean your house and your body and your family. This really did impact indigenous nations probably the hardest in the U.S. One of the places we work is the Navajo Nation, which is the country's largest reservation. There we have the Navajo Water Project, which is a completely indigenous-led initiative to provide hot and cold running water to families who have never had it. And at one point at the beginning of the pandemic, the per capita COVID rate on Navajo was the highest in the country. It surpassed New York. And it's largely believed that that's because more than 30% of homes there don't have running water. So this is not just the case for Navajo. Indigenous families in the U.S. are 19 times more likely than white families not to have running water at home. Many of them are in Alaska, many of them are in the Southwest, and scattered in Native nations across the country. But it is one of the communities hardest hit, both by this problem with water and by the pandemic.
And George, obviously, as we are talking about climate change and Earth Day, I have to ask how much climate change is contributing to this gap in supply and demand for water, and how we might be able to improve water scarcity issues here in the U.S. as well as around the world.
Yeah, and that's a really excellent question. I mean, that's the billion-dollar question, Lana. I think. What I love about our work is that this problem in the end is so solvable. Just a couple million people. That might seem like a big number, but it is one that we can absolutely close the gap on in my lifetime, certainly just in the next few decades. It's climate change, though, that keeps me up at night. This is the big question. How is this going to impact water supply? How is it going to impact weather patterns? Already over the last 100 years on a place like the Navajo Nation in the Southwest, which covers parts of New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah, more than 90% of surface water resources have disappeared, meaning that families without running water used to be able to walk out of their house with a bucket in an emergency and just grab water out of, say, a pond or a stream. But those resources are no longer there. And as drought intensifies in parts of the country and flooding intensifies in others, which causes a lot of damage to sewage and septic systems, causing the illnesses like tropical illnesses, we're going to see more families fall offline. And so I think, as a country, we really need to be thinking about the investments that we need to make in order to make this country more resilient in the face of climate-related changes and stresses, and really be taking these families, these marginalized folks who don't have access, and making them our priority, focusing on them because they will be the hardest hit, the first to feel these impacts, and they need our support now.
2 million Americans, 4 billion people worldwide. George McGraw, thank you.
Thanks for having me. Happy Earth Day.